One popular misconception in Western culture is that slavery was eradicated when the Civil War ended. This misconception is first problematic because very few white civilians can attest to the realities of slavery that still daunt the world today. And second, this is problematic because many, even colored individuals, fail to realize that the usage of slavery is at an all-time high on the global scale. As the International Review of Sociology explains in its 41st volume published in August of 2015, that 27 to 30,000 individuals are currently incarcerated in first, migrant slavery, second, in child slavery, and sex trafficking, finally. This reality must be abolished by the international community because of the prevalence in slavery in such low socioeconomic communities. And as The Guardian explains on August 17th of 2015, in order to combat slavery effectively, it must be combated at the root. So, when asking today's question, what does the international community need to do to combat slavery? The answer is to take immediate action because there needs to be a policy for zero tolerance of slavery. They can do this first by raising awareness of slavery. Second, by enacting laws that prohibit slavery. And finally, by enforcing these laws and setting up a precedent for no slavery allowed. The Washington Post explains on August 14th of 2015 that in the United States there are 35,000 museums, but only one of these museums is dedicated to acknowledging the only form of slavery that most Americans accept, which is the slavery in the 1800s. And this reality is the first reason how the international community needs to combat slavery, because people can't support a cause if they don't know about it. The Christian Today explains on August 17th of 2015 that when ISIS posted to Twitter that it would be incarcerating 3 women in a sex trafficking trade, many people were surprised because they didn't realize that this reality was so prevalent in the Middle Eastern world. But the fact is, it's also prevalent in the world of the United States. As the Elsevier Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect explains in its 44th volume, published in June of 2015, that there are signs in the United States health system that many children are currently being incarcerated and abused for merits of slavery and sex trafficking today in the United States. Yet, people don't realize this is happening right in their back door, in Houston, for example. It is also imperative that the awareness is raised and people understand the reasoning behind slavery. The New York Times explains on August 14th of 2015 that while ISIS may use religious attributions to compensate for their use of slavery, many other nations purely don't do it for just economic reasons, but because of the social hierarchies that plague their societies. If this is going to be solved for, it is imperative that the international community goes and arouses the support of the developed communities, because eradicating slavery is not going to be a cheap task or a task that will be achieved without strong support. Second, it is imperative that there are actual laws enforced in order to assert this policy of no slavery tolerance. The BBC explains on August 14th of 2015 that Mauritius is the last state to make a law of anti-slavery. And this is the second way that the international community can combat slavery, by encouraging more nations to make these kinds of laws. But the DW explains on August 14th of 2015 that one Mauritian man still refuses to go back to Mauritius from Germany because of the fact that he's afraid that he will be killed even when he enters the state, because he ran away from his home. But as the International Business Times explains, on July 29th of 2015, that more states are being able to go and enact these laws as well. As David Cameron saw this issue in Mauritius and went and made an action within the United Kingdom. And as the Financial Times explains, on July 29th of 2015, that this issue is shown in the markets of United Kingdom companies that receive more than 34 million euros in revenue each year. What this law is going to do is allow these companies to be searched from head to toe in order to show whether or not they are using slavery as a form of labor. And because these laws are being enforced, this will finally lead to, or because these laws are being enacted, this will finally lead to enforcement and hopeful eradication of slavery, which is the final way that the international community can eradicate slavery and combat slavery, by enforcing the laws that are being put into play. Foreign Affairs explains on August 9th of 2015 that when this community went into Cambodia, 4,000 men were in question, and children were taken out of their care that were being used as sex slaves and even as labor slaves. The fact is, because these laws were actually enacted, although they were put into play early in 2000s, it was imperative that the lives of these children was saved because people actually went into the countries. But as the New European explains on August 17th of 2015, that this is not the only place where these laws must be enacted and enforced as well. Thailand. Many boats from Thailand were intercepted recently and showed signs of slavery being used in order to have labor. And so the precedent that David Cameron was put for these boats in Thailand showed that these companies weren't allowed to trade with anyone in the European Union because they used slavery. But the fact is, this is going to result in roughly $575 million in losses for Thailand, something that will take a huge blow to their economy. So in order for the international community to be fully effective when going and combating slavery on a national global scale, is the fact that they need to compensate or find a way to help countries continue to be effective even without slavery. So in returning to today's question, what does the international community need to do in order to combat slavery? The answer is to take immediate action because there is a zero tolerance policy needed in regards to slavery. They can do this first by raising awareness of slavery, second by implementing laws, and finally by enforcing these laws in other nations, not just those developed.